And let me introduce you to our next panel. We have Professor Siobhain O'Mahony, Professor Jens Walter, and Dr. Julie O'Sullivan, all from the APC Microbiome Ireland Research Centre in Cork. So to start us off, I'm going to ask each of you to give a quick introduction and maybe outline the research that you've been involved in recently.
Super, and thanks so much. Thanks so much to the organisers. This phenomenal event, and it's lovely to be looking outside this way at all of you as well, and thanks so much, Claire. So my name is Professor Siobhain O'Mahony. I'm a Professor of Neurobiology and Women's Health, and I suppose I've worked on the gut microbiome for about 20 years, and myself and a professor, when we started my PhD in 2004, came up with this concept that the microbiome within our bowel can affect our well-being and our brain. That long ago, it was like voodoo science. Nowadays, we know that what you eat and what your microbes actually do within your bowel actually does help your well-being and your brain. So I suppose these days now, I still work on the microbiome gut-brain axis and trying to design interventions specifically around women's health to improve our mental health. So with regard to women's health, I work in a number of different areas across the lifespan. I work in pregnancy quite a bit, but I also work on a very serious disorder as well, like we've heard, an inflammatory disorder called endometriosis. And I also work in perimenopause and menopause, which we're designing a supplement around. So thank you.
Amazing, Siobhain. Well, all us women are delighted that you're doing what you're doing. Thank you very much. Jens, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Jens Walter. I'm the professor for ecology, food and the microbiome. So I view microbiomes as ecological systems, meaning like rainforests, for example. And then I'm interested in how these microbes interact and how they talk with each other. And we heard a lot about these metabolites that they produce. So I'm interested in this. And then I try and take this information and design strategies to modulate the microbiome, be it probiotics, prebiotics, fecal microbiota transplants, or diet, which is one thing that we are very interested in the group. Yeah. And at the end, I'm interested in making people healthier. I'm very much interested in metabolic health and autoimmune diseases, but I also work with Siobhain on some of her projects. Yeah.
Fantastic. Julie.
Hi, so my name is Dr. Julie O'Sullivan. I'm a senior postdoctoral researcher at APC Microbiome Ireland. And I suppose my research has been focused on the skin microbiome for 10 years now. I started back my PhD in 2015, and just by chance, I fell into the skin microbiology. My work initially focused on bacteria found in our skin that produce antimicrobial peptides, which are like protein missiles that can kill off bad bacteria and help keep our skin healthy. So I did identified novel ones of these and did a lot of characterizing and a lot of screening. And then I suppose as my research moved on, I kind of got a bit tired of that, and I wanted to find an application for my work to improve skin health. So at the moment I am working on developing a topical product that I suppose we can talk about later.
100%. You might hold your microphone up a little bit next time.
Sorry.
But you've a lovely loud voice, so it's all good. We're all good.
Yeah, I'm from Cork, yeah.
Siobhain, let's talk a little bit about your work then and the microbiome. From puberty to perimenopause to post-menopause, what's happening with the microbiome?
Yeah, that's really good. And I wanted to thank Oonagh O'Hagan for giving a fantastic overview of the microbiome. And from a nerdy scientific point of view, she deserves an honorary professorship from the APC.
She'd love that.
So it's unbelievable to have such a fantastic overview of the microbiome already given to this audience in a really good way. So I suppose a lot of our research is important to, get it across to the public as well, and also to our potential patients and participants in our studies as well. So yeah, I work on the microbiome from the women's health or hormonal point of view. It's really important to mind your microbes. So your actual microbes within your bowel change across your life stage. You're born virtually sterile. We've had a lot of conversations and arguments about this. Virtually sterile is the word I use. So at birth, there's 2 ways to be born, for example. We know that. And there's very little bacteria on or in the baby. And then as the baby grows, as the baby is fed, bacteria, and then the microbiome we've heard earlier is encompassing a lot more than the actual bacteria. When I use the word microbiome, I'm just talking about bacteria. That's the only type of microbiome I study. But you start to see these colonization patterns in the very young baby. What's really important is to have this optimal early life colonization, which of course is difficult to maintain. The best way you can get your optimal microbiome is to have a non-stressed pregnant mom, to have a vaginal delivery where your mother's vaginal microbiome is amazing, where you're breastfed, where you have no stress in early life, you have no antibiotics, and you have no disease. This is very difficult to achieve, but not having this optimal set of events means that you develop some resistance as well and resilience as well. So our microbiome starts to develop as we grow as a baby. And then it's a very dynamic period. It settles a little bit when we're 5. And then by adolescence, we start to see this really crazy kind of dynamic change as well in our microbiome. And this is the first major time we see the interactions between our bacteria within our bowel and our hormones. So we do know as well that there's this bidirectional communication between our hormones. So we know there's lots of different types. For example, I'll talk about estrogen today. Testosterone is really important for us all, not just for Jens. But I really study how the estrogens really impact on our gut microbiome and vice versa. So during puberty, of course, we see changes to hormones, all different hormones, and our microbiome really changes during that life stage as well. But I suppose the life stage that I'm really interested in is the perimenopausal phase, and then, of course, menopause and postmenopause as well. What we tend to see is that before perimenopause, so pre-perimenopause, we tend to see the microbiome of women and men to be quite different, and that's because they're responding to our hormones. As women tend towards the perimenopausal phase, we tend to see a drop-off of some of the microbes, particularly the microbes that are important for your estrogen metabolism, and also some of those microbes that are important for metabolizing foods such as isoflavones that are really good for everybody in the audience, but really beneficial for women if they can metabolize them and turn them into these estrogenic compounds that can affect then and interact with your estrogen receptors. So we tend to see a decline in these estrogen positive microbiome elements as well as we tend towards menopause. And actually in the postmenopausal phase, we tend to see the gut microbiome of women is very similar to men. But what is really important to know is that your diet, your stress, all of the different factors affect your microbiome all during your life, not just through these transitional phases as well. So it's really important to mind your microbes for your hormonal health throughout your entire life. What we're studying is the area of gut health and hormonal health really in the perimenopausal phase. So myself, Professor Jens and Dr. Eamon Gleeson in the audience, hopefully will spin out a company from University College Cork early next year. Our supplement called Fembiome Meno is currently in clinical validation testing as well. And it's really designing a microbiome capsule, so a capsule that contains certain specific microbes and a fibre to feed them to actually maintain hormonal health. Initially for perimenopause, but we do hope to design different interventions for different stages of women's life.
Wow, that's really exciting, really exciting. And when we talk about those different stages in life, the fluctuations of the hormones, obviously often there is a lot going on with mood. So what's the connection there? Because there is a big connection between our microbiome, as Oonagh touched on, and our mental health.
Absolutely. Definitely, absolutely. And I think we all know that we don't feel well sometimes psychologically if our guts are off. So there's this axis called the microbiome gut-brain axis. And basically there's bacteria within your bowel, and as Oonagh very nicely said, there's bacteria within your bowel that produce the exact same chemicals that your central nervous system or your brain actually produces. This is bizarre. They produce serotonin, dopamine, as we heard, noradrenaline. It's bizarre that these bacteria within our bowel produce the same chemicals that make your brain actually tick. So they are actually having a huge impact, not only on the bowel, but also on the brain as well. Our gut is a highly vascularized system. It's highly vascularized, which just means there's loads of blood vessels on the outside of it, because the main function of your bowel, as we would have also always thought, was to harvest nutrients from your food, let them travel into your blood system around the body and to everywhere you need. But the bacteria in our bowel, we know there's some very clever ones that produce these hormones and neurotransmitters that can travel through our blood system to affect our brain health. So therefore, if they're not there at the right level, there's a potential for your enormous amount of serotonin that we know is produced within our gut to actually not reach your brain. And we know there's other lovely chemicals like GABA that allows us to relax. It's actually an anxiolytic, so it's in drugs that actually help you relax. So maybe by putting those microbes back into our gut that produce the neurotransmitters that have a beneficial effect on our brain would have a very positive effect on brain health. So minding your microbes throughout your entire life is extremely important for you to just generally feel well. You know, if you eat a load of crap, you really don't feel well. And that's a physiological process initially. Then you start to feel guilt. You start to feel worry. Oh God, am I really eating a bad diet overall? But it's not just to do with the actual physiological change within your bowel. It's to do with the actual chemicals that your bacteria are actually producing and then eventually get into your brain.
And what about some of the more serious conditions like PMDD, or you mentioned you're looking at endometriosis, you're dealing with perimenopause. This will transfer across to help ease those symptoms.
Yes, absolutely. And PMDD is very serious. All of these conditions are serious that we're talking about this evening. PMDD is it's really major psychological and emotional upset coming around your menstrual period as well. So again, studies have looked at the different microbes within the bowel associated with the onset of the worsening of these symptoms. And it seems that the microbiome does change in a cyclical fashion. And while I'm talking very positively about women's health and the gut microbiome, there's been so little research across the entire world forever on women's health. We'll just put that out there. Research and research funding bodies are starting to improve their funding and also their research towards women's health as well. But there is some studies looking at the impact of cyclical change on the gut microbiome and PMDD. The difference with endometriosis is that it's an estrogen-driven condition. And we know that hormones in any condition can affect your brain. They can affect every single part of our body, for example, but they do affect our brain health. So therefore, if we have these bacteria within our bowel that are able to metabolize estrogen, put estrogen back into our body, because we essentially excrete so many things through our bowel, and these include our hormones. We have to get rid of hormones because we can't have them being produced at a consistent rate and staying within our body, because that's not good for us either. But we do excrete hormones, including estrogen, through our bowel. There's a specific set of bacteria called the estroblome that's very good at deconjugating. All it means is that it just snaps it apart. So it means that the estrogen doesn't go out through your poo, but in actual fact, it can go back into your blood system and go to anywhere in the body. So that's great if you're a perimenopausal woman and you want to keep your estrogen all to yourself and put it back into your body. But if you're a woman suffering from endometriosis, you're actually going to have a bloom of these estroblome bacteria. So therefore, there's a way more efficient community of bacteria in the bowel of people with endometriosis that is harnessing and putting the estrogen back in at a higher rate. Depends on the condition, of course, depends on the life stage, but you need to maintain a balance of these hormone metabolizing bacteria within the bowel. And ultimately, because our hormones affect our brain health and our bacteria metabolites affect our brain health, you want to keep that maintenance and that balance between the two as well. And a lot of it is about diet.
Is there any disruption caused by the contraceptive pill or HRT?
There's many studies looking at HRT now and the microbiome. Not many studies. A few nice big studies are looking at hormone replacement therapy and the microbiome. And in actual fact, I've mentioned the flip, that our microbiome actually changes during the postmenopausal phase. And in actual fact, hormone replacement therapy actually flips it back to the perimenopausal phase, which is very positive from a microbiome perspective. But the microbiome doesn't sit in the gut alone. It sits within our happy tube. What do we call it? Tube within, inner tube. Inner tube?
Inner tube of life, is
Inner
that what it's
tube of
called?
life.
I loved it.
this.
Gum to bum. I'm listening now.
I love this. But our gut is also extremely important from a physiological point of view itself. So it needs to be this tube, and it needs to be a tube that decides what goes in and what stays in there and what goes out, And sometimes there's a situation where too many things start going out of the gut. And this syndrome called leaky gut, it was a phrase that was started many years ago. And then it was Fergus Shanahan said, don't use that phrase anymore. But anyway, it basically means that your gut becomes a bit holy and allows too many things out of it that shouldn't be released from the bowel. If you get too many things going out of the gut, and not just nutrients and the hormones that you want to absorb, you can get parts of bacterial. So bacterial cell wall bits can actually travel out. Some of the pro-inflammatory cytokines that your bacteria are actually producing will also travel into the blood. So basically what it means to have a more kind of holy gut means that you have kind of this inflamed or kind of subclinical inflammation in your systemic system, which isn't positive really as well. Where are we going with that, Claire?
About HRT or the contraceptive pill, would they be things that your gut microbiome wouldn't necessarily recognise because they're synthetic?
No, they do. They have a positive effect, and both of them have a positive effect on the gut microbiome. But what they do then in the flip side is that they affect the permeability. So whilst it looks like they're having a positive effect, if you take a fecal sample, you analyze it using a sequencing system that we use, from a perspective of the holistic, the gut being healthy, the microbiome being healthy, it doesn't have a long-term good effect on the actual gut physiology. But this, again, is a handful of studies. We can't jump to panic as well, because we know there are studies looking at long-term effects of hormone replacement therapy on brain health as well. And actually, I read, one of my postdocs actually summarised a really nice study the other day looking at hormone replacement therapy and brain health. And what they showed was those women that went through surgical menopause, taking HRT was very beneficial for brain volume, so parts of your brain that are really good for memory, while those women that went through a natural menopause, hormone replacement therapy had no effect, long-term effect on brain health, which is positive too.
And as you said, the research is starting to catch up, because even our HRT is far more body identical than it ever was. And, you know, you're at the forefront of pushing this kind of research through. So women's health is no longer under-researched, underfunded and misunderstood. How far away are we from women having their microbiome profiled individually and having individualised care based on that?
Well, I'm going to ask Jens to help me with this one in a minute. So personalised precision medicine we were talking about a while ago. Like profiling the microbiome.
And profiling
Is
the
this real?
microbiome, we are ready.
Yeah.
You know, we can do this. What you need, if you want to personalize treatment, what you need is big studies. You know, because you have to, you know, get your models, you need to your machine learning, you know, to be in place. So for that, you need the amazing studies that Siobhain is going to do very soon, you know, over the next 5 years, yeah. With me. And yeah. And then I think, you know, you can probably do it, but you need big studies with a lot of data, you know, so you can train models, and then, you know, the sequencing then is actually reasonable easy, and it is also reasonable cheap, and that's already the case.
Because all this emerging science around the microbiome is really changing how we look at health. And we used to give a one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare, whereas we have unique microbiome. So will we get to a point where people are having their poo checked, basically, and their microbiome checked to see what it is that they need?
So that's happening already. So you can actually go to the internet and you will find companies that are happy to take your poop sample, you know, sequence them and give you dietary advice. I'm still a little bit cautious about this, so I think it's a bit early on, you know, but it is already happening, and it's probably going to increase. And this is more in the nutrition area at the moment. And then when it comes, there's a lot of research. Actually, we heard a lot about inflammatory bowel disease, for example, or other conditions, you know, that are linked to the microbiome. C. diff infections, for example, but many other things, you know, and I think there it's also starting to come, you know, but you're completely right. Our microbiome is like a fingerprint, and even monozygotic twins, you know, have actually different microbiomes, you know, so it's worth, you know, to look, you know, how our microbiome look, how does it interact with the disease states, you know, that we have, how does it interact with drugs? And then I'm quite interested how does it interact with different, you know, diets and dietary components, but this is definitely coming.
Yeah, because now, as you say, it's separate companies, but it's not the go-to for when you arrive to a medical professional. And hopefully that's the way things will begin to go. Let's talk about how we mind our microbiome, though, because supplements are fantastic and really play their role. But you're very interested in the role of nutrition. So what do you consider to be a healthy diet for your microbiome?
So I got very interested in nutrition as a microbiome modulation strategy, basically. And what motivates me is chronic diseases, and chronic diseases that are kind of, you know, now major problems in modern society. So I talk about, you know, actually inflammatory bowel disease would be one of them, but also type 2 diabetes, you know, conditions linked to obesity, stroke, heart disease, colon cancer, for example, would be a huge one. And then also, you know, the diseases, neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, for example. And the reason why that fascinates me is that first, they are clearly linked to diet. So we have a lot of good epidemiological research, you know, that we can probably achieve much more with diet to prevent these diseases than most people realize. But what is also fascinating is that these diseases are clearly linked to the microbiome. You know, we do know this through work in animal models of these diseases, and the differences are just absolutely dramatic. Yeah, for example, in animal models of multiple sclerosis, for example, if you raise them without a microbiome, they just don't get any disease. So we know that the microbiome is just a trigger. Actually, inflammatory bowel disease is another very good example there, where all the animal models, and there are probably 100, all of them are very, very different if you keep them without bacteria. So we know the microbiome is linked to these diseases, and we know that diet, is linked to these diseases. So what I'm starting to get very interested is, can we design diets, to modulate the microbiome to then try to prevent these chronic diseases?
Because when Siobhain spoke about the baby and everything having to be stress-free and there to be lots of bacteria everywhere, sometimes it feels like it's almost impossible to have a microbiome that is perfect in a modern world. Is that true? Is modern life what's eating away at our microbiome?
So that's very true. And this is something I got very interested in, again, through my interest in chronic diseases. So so these chronic diseases that I mentioned, these Western plagues, because they increase in our modern society, and the way we live actually gets, colon cancer, for example, is almost absent in rural areas of Africa, for example. So this made me very interested in actually how does our modern life, how does Westernization or industrialization actually disrupt our microbiome. So I was involved in studies where we went to rural Papua New Guinea, to places where there's still, tribes, and we also did a study in Amur Indians in the Venezuelan rainforest. So these are tribes of Native Americans, they live without a street, they have no contact. You have to take a boat there to get, and then you have to convince them, to give you poop samples, and we did this quite a bit. And they laugh.
They laughed?
They laugh. Or they think it's ridiculously funny that these idiots on boats come, and ask them about poop samples. Yeah. So actually, my collaborator who worked with the Yanomami, also with this tribe she told me they call her Dr. Poop. Yeah. So, but what we do is we do these sequencing studies, and what we know now is their microbiome is way more diverse than ours, and it's functionally completely different. We heard a lot about short-chain fatty acids. They produce way more of these short-chain fatty acids. They have much, much more microbial species in their gut. We, know this is linked to diet, and we are very interested to look at these interactions and try to think about, how could we change, the way we eat based on this kind of information.
So how do they live in these tribes?
So there's a lot of things that are different there, so so and some of this is, I don't want to romanticize this, because they are not on average healthier, they have a lot of infections, there's no sanitation, they drink waters out of rivers, without, any treatment, then, so no infection, but they also have no chronic diseases. So this is the fascinating part. So it seems really that we've, by becoming healthier in the Western world, and living longer and everything, and, not having, not having our babies die, of infectious diseases, we've now kind of traded this in for this higher, predisposition to these chronic diseases. Yeah. And I think, so it's the way how they share microbiomes, through water, but then also it's the way they eat, and exercises also. So there's a lot of different factors that play a role. But what interests me is really how their diet is different. And obviously they have none of these processed foods, that we are now consuming with 50, 60, 65%, They are not necessarily vegetarian. They are not necessarily meat eaters. They actually have quite a varied diet. But one key difference is the lack of processed food. And another key difference, which we are very interested in, is they eat a lot more of dietary fiber. And we've already mentioned this on the first panel. So these are these non-digestible carbohydrates we have in food that are fermented by our gut bacteria that feed our gut microbiome, and produce all these helpful health-promoting metabolites like butyrate, for example. Yeah. So what we do is, and this is one of my key interests, what we do in a modern world is we are essentially starving our gut microbiome. And because this is because the food we are eating is essentially refined. It's all just sugar and starch, and it does lack these nutrients for our gut microbiomes. And this has a whole bunch of, metabolic complications, but it also has complications like, for example, that our microbiome just starts degrading our mucus layer, for example. And then the bacteria actually become very close to the epithelial lining, actually driving inflammatory processes. So this, I think, is one of the key mechanisms, why we have this increase in chronic diseases that we see in modern societies.
And I think sometimes when we're talking about health and living healthily, sometimes it can nearly feel like an eye roll. Everybody knows we're not supposed to be eating processed foods. But I think what's really exciting about gut health and the microbiome is that we can turn things around. We can make a difference with some quite simple tweaks. It doesn't have to be perfect all the time. But talk to us a little bit about what we should be having in our diet.
So I think there are a few basic rules from the nutrition field, actually. And actually, I really like, so I'm a big fan of a nutritionist at Stanford University. His name is Christopher Gardner, and he's doing a great job in interviews. And he said, there's a lot of controversy in the nutrition fields. The vegans, are yelling at the meat eaters, and the carnivore diet are yelling back, and then they, it seems like, and if you go on social media, it gets completely inflamed. But he says there are actually 4 rules that virtually almost everyone in the nutrition field agrees on. And the first one is eat whole foods. So it's not so much about is it vegetarian or meat or something, but it's whole foods. And the big difference is here to ultra processed foods, which are not whole, which are not foods, that our grandparents would have recognized. So eat whole foods, bulk up on vegetables. So this is another which are full of fiber, feed your gut microbiome. Avoid refined carbohydrates. So this is our starch, our pasta. It's a very different rule to follow because everything that's tasty is refined carbohydrates, cakes, cookies. You can do yourself a lot of good if just going whole grain, for example, but I would even limit this to some degree, because there's just too much starch and too much, digestible actually sugars, in our diet. Yeah. And the last rule is avoid added sugar, And that's also not that easy because even in fruit juices, for example, you have a lot of sugar in there. You now can take this a step further and say, look, can we look at the microbiome? This is something what I do. So we actually developed, I think it was mentioned, the NIMI diet, this non-industrialized microbiome restore diet. So we took this information from the Amerindians and the Papua New Guineans and how they eat, and then developed, a diet, that we could test in a human trial actually in Canada. So, and it's, a lot of plant foods, a lot of dietary fiber, not vegetarian, but around 45 grams. So I'm not sure how easy it is to implement, but it is definitely possible. Yeah. And the just clinical effects that we saw in terms of, the improvements of indicators of chronic diseases were just tremendous. Yeah. So just as an example, so this was a study, 3 weeks, healthy Canadian, their cholesterol went down 17%, their blood glucose went down 6%, and then 2 inflammatory markers, CRP, which is a marker of heart disease, went down 14%, and calprotectin, which is actually a marker that's used in inflammatory bowel disease quite a bit, went also down 21%. So then we saw all kind of, beneficial metabolites, also neuroprotective metabolites going up, pro-cancer metabolites going down. So it was absolutely tremendous what you can do in 3 weeks, even if you have a screwed up Western microbiome, which is very recomforting, because it seems like despite our microbiome being, lower in diversity and impaired, we can still, do something good with actually, a healthier diet that actually feeds these microbes.
In 3 weeks, that's incredible. And is everybody's microbiome individual? So will certain foods affect me differently to Siobhain, to you, to Julie? And do we need to start thinking that way? Or is that blanket advice for everyone?
So I think it's a combination. So I do think there is such a thing as a healthy human diet. I think we can't escape human biology. Some of the claims made by, the personalized nutrition movement, that you might be, a cupcake might be good for you, or a donut or so. I don't really believe this. I do think to virtually all of us in this room, a, cream donut, is going to be bad, So So I do think, and I know that nutritionists agree with this, so there is such a thing as a healthy human diet. And there are these, key rules that I've mentioned, that I think that are beneficial for almost all of us. That being said, I think around this healthy diet, there's a lot of potential to then personalize. If you are a marathon runner, obviously sugar isn't that bad for you anymore. So still think it's worth considering eating healthy because you're still predisposing you to certain chronic diseases, but obviously, starch and sugar, would be very different for somebody who's very, very active. If you are an individual suffering, for example, from pre-diabetes, going very low carb, and I'm not saying low fiber, but low digestible carb, is very beneficial. And then I do still think that the microbiome has a role to play in all of this. But I think individualization, I think to be really successful, still has to happen under the umbrella of healthy eating.
What about fermented foods then? Why do they have such a positive impact on the microbiome?
They actually don't have an impact on the microbiome. And the reason for this is because the microbiome is a rainforest, it's a jungle, and it's a highly evolved system that is adapted to you as a human. Microbiome in a fermented food is a highly adapted system, that is adapted to this fermented food. But what fermented foods do is they provide you with a lot of microbes. And these microbes interact with your immune system, and these microbes produce a lot of metabolites. So you can actually see, and I think this research is pretty much in its infancy, but I'm very excited about it. But you can see good fermented food almost like these immune metabolite bombs, because they are full of microbes, full of, compounds that stimulate your immune system, and they are full of metabolites, that might have beneficial effects. And so even if they don't do that much to your microbiome, I still think there is a lot of potential in fermented foods.
Okay, amazing. I could actually sit and talk to you and Siobhain all day, but Julie is on the end there with her Cork voice waiting to tell us about our microbiome and our skin. Talk to us a bit about that, because we're talking all about the gut and the gum to the bum and everything going on inside, but you're talking about everything on the outside.
Yeah, on the outside. So our skin is the largest organ in our body, and as clean, as shiny as you all are here today, you're covered with millions and millions different types of microbes. So like similar to the gut, our skin microbiome consists of different bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live on our skin and all work together to keep our skin healthy. So when the skin microbiome is balanced, our microbes can fight off infections, harmful bacteria. They can actually support the skin barrier, and they can even train our immune system. So healthy skin isn't sterile. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, but all good work. And then I suppose, I'm talking there about balance, but when imbalances occur, beneficial microbes, some more often than not, decrease in levels, and this gives like prime opportunity for the bad guys, harmful bacteria levels to increase. One such example is of a harmful bacteria would be Staphylococcus aureus, which I'm really focused on targeting with my work. So in eczema, levels of Staphylococcus aureus surge, and this bacteria really drives the inflammation and the redness and itchiness associated with that is suffered by eczema sufferers. And then again, with regards to acne, certain levels of certain types of Cutibacterium acne increase, and these actually trigger the breakouts. So there's a lot going on.
And looking at our skin health through the lens of our microbiome, will that begin to change how we treat conditions?
Oh yeah, there's been a huge shift, I think, in our approach. For decades, I'd say skincare was all about stripping away the bacteria and stripping away all the top layers of our skin, essentially destroying our microbiome. Products like the St. Ives scrub was brilliant for that. But now I think we're realizing there's definitely a more realization how important our microbiome is and how we really need to protect and support it. And by supporting it, actually builds skin's resilience and can improve long-term health outcomes.
So when the skin is inflamed in any way, obviously you're mentioning eczema and things that people may have been going for treatment for. But if something is happening in our skin, should we begin to think about our gut, not just topical applications, but feeding our skin from within?
Oh, 100%, yeah. So our skin, like how the brain and the gut are linked, the skin and gut connection, we're actually over 10 years behind the studies on the brain and the gut, but the momentum is starting to pick up and we are getting there. So really the gut-skin axis is how our gut microbiome influences skin health. So when our gut bacteria is imbalanced, this can be caused by various things, as we heard earlier: stress, environment, genetics, antibiotics. Yeah, so when the gut is stressed, this triggers different problems on our skin. So one such example, I'll go back again to eczema. People with eczema have lower levels of a particular bacteria called Faecalibacterium prunitzii, excuse my pronunciation. And this bacteria is known for its anti-inflammatory properties. And again, in people with acne, there is certain species of Bacteroides are more dominant than others. And then, as we heard the word cytokine earlier, so a key cytokine, and cytokines are essentially text messages that our immune cells send to one another to do different jobs. One message might be to be anti-inflammatory, one would be cause inflammation, fight the infection, etc. So one key cytokine is IL-17, and this can drive inflammation big time and cause worsened symptoms on our skin. So there's a massive connection there. At the moment, with my current work, we are trying to develop a topical cream that'll work. It's essentially powered by postbiotics. And these postbiotics are compounds or metabolites, as we heard earlier, that are produced by beneficial good bacteria. And the main aim with the product we're developing is that we really want to help break the cycle of flare-ups fast. Our postbiotics have gone through rigorous selection, and they're really good. And the ones we've selected are brilliant at inhibiting the bacteria Staphylococcus aureus, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a key driver in the redness and itchiness symptoms that eczema sufferers experience. So,
How far away are you from marketing this?
Well, currently we're supported by a 1-year Enterprise Ireland commercialisation fund. It's proof of concept, and I'm currently in the throes of my next application. It's going in next week. So fingers crossed, this would be for 2 more years. Toes, everything crossed. This would be for a further 2 years funding, and during this 2 years, like Siobhain, I'd like to conduct a clinical trial just to show that we're targeting mild to moderate eczema, but we plan to include an arm in the study for moderate to severe sufferers as well. And it would be this grant, for further funding would go to partner with a third-party manufacturer, scale up production, and the plan would be to spin out early 2029.
Sounds easy peasy.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah.
Can I say something? We are nerdy. We're probably talking about loads of stuff that is maybe off the table, like poo and different bacteria. But I want to actually, I don't need to talk about myself. I talk about myself loads. But for people to recognize these two phenomenal scientists, they do so much amazing science. They're super clever, but they're also doing something really different. They're trying to commercialize their research. So for academics such as us that work at universities, this is a really weird thing. we can think about science, we can do lab work, we can think about what bacteria are doing to each other and to us, but it's a very different ballgame to try and get your fantastic research out there and to sell it and to get people to buy it and believe in the absolute amazing science. So these two researchers are doing that.
You're doing that too.
You're doing it too.
You are.
I'm doing it too.
She's paving the way.
She is the most advanced in
Yeah.
that.
Was that-
Yeah.
Now we did say we'd finish at 9, but I want to ask you to finish up. And Julie, I'll start with you. What are you most excited about, aside from bringing that to market? And I'm excited for you about the research into the microbiome and where it's going.
Yeah, I think for me, I think the potential for personalizing, care and being able to target the root cause rather than just the symptoms, because microbial imbalances aren't just a side effect. They play a central role in a lot of conditions, be it the skin, the brain, the gut. So yeah, I'm most excited about that. And yeah, developing my own product and maybe a companion product as well.
Yes, which you will, I have no doubt. Jens, what about you?
So I am probably the most excited at the moment about the prospect of how much better you can live with a healthier diet, and this is obviously it's also inspired by our own research, but it's also, if you look into the nutrition field, just in the last 2 or 3 years, there are several high profile studies that show with a healthier diet, you can live 10 years longer. And it's 10 years life expectancy, but it's also 10 years health expectancy. Also meaning that it's 10 years of a healthier life, a life without chronic diseases. So this, I think, is hugely, inspiring. This is what motivates me to, that's why we have all our recipes freely available, on the internet and stuff. But it's also, I think it provides, because I'm completely aware that not everybody in a modern world is starting to eat, this or follow these rules. But it also provides a huge opportunity for, industry and food scientists, to just develop. I said how bad refined carbohydrates are. There is technologies around to make these carbohydrates better through modern food research. So I thought this is what probably excites me. And the microbiome is a huge component of this, because all of these thinking about diet, is, as we discussed, it's feeding our microbes. But the potential there is, I think people underestimate how much good they can do themselves by just eating healthier.
Yeah, 100%. And Siobhain, final one to you.
Thanks so much. I suppose I am super excited about our potential product that we're testing in a perimenopause population at the moment in Cork. It's in Cork because the clinical trials company is in Cork. But we do hope after we spin out as Fembiome early next year to have products for all different stages of women's life. But I suppose it's not just the commercial element I'm interested in. I remember chatting to this chap who really wanted to be part of my potential business. I said, I really want to help women. And he said, I really want to make money. And I was like, Jesus. Okay, I do have to work with different people to just successfully set up and to run a business. But I really am passionate about the education around brain health for women across different life stages. And this is probably the thing I'm most passionate about, Claire.
Yeah, and to empower people that obviously, yes, there are going to be products, but that there are things that people can do in their own lives.
Absolutely.
To maximise those benefits too.
Definitely, and it can't all come from a capsule. We're designing a capsule and a fibre companion for it. But I always believe, and again, Jens has said it, food first, and you can heal thyself with food.
Yeah, and I do think even having those products though, and doing that research starts that conversation.
It does.
It gives that knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, it's incredible work that you do. I just show up and talk into a microphone and smile. So thank you so much to our incredible panel, Professor Siobhain O'Mahony, Jens Walter and Dr. Julie O'Sullivan. Thank you so much.